Hey guys, welcome back, I'm Jay. In this episode, we're going to look at different AWS messaging services, Amazon SQS, SNS, and SES. Amazon Simple Queue Service or SQS is a fully managed, push-pull based message queuing service that enables you to decouple and scale microservices, distributed systems, and serverless applications. A message queue provides similar functionality to buffering, which enables you to buffer workloads as background jobs. For instance, suppose you're running an online shopping site. When a user places an order, you can capture the payment information and send a message to SQS. While the ordering system is processing the order, the background system can process the payment information in SQS and run some fraud detection algorithms. Whenever a false credit card is detected, your system will label the transaction with high risk and send you a notification. SQS uses the push-pull model. The producer applications push messages to SQS, and the consumer applications pull messages from SQS. Consumers constantly check for new messages and process them with a small delay. There are two types of SQS queues, standard queues and FIFO queues. A standard queue delivers messages at least once. It makes the best effort to preserve the order of messages, but more than one copy of a message might be delivered out of order. A FIFO queue delivers messages exactly once, always in the first in first out order. Here is how SQS works. Suppose you have an order processing application acting as a producer at the back end of an online shopping site. The producer keeps sending order processing tasks as messages to the message queue. Messages arrive in the queue and wait for the consumer to check the message. A consumer can be a credit card validation application running on EC2. Because the validation process can take some time, and the process time varies depending on each transaction. For instance, there might be extra validation steps for potentially high-risk transactions, and fewer validation steps for normal transactions. Therefore, the validation process should be running on the background. The consumer checks additional messages after current message has been processed. New messages continue to arrive and wait in the queue. Because there is a processing delay from the consumer. SQS is suited for loosely coupled applications that can tolerate delay. In a standard queue, a message is delivered at least once, but occasionally more than one copy of a message is delivered. It tries its best to keep messages in order. However, some messages might be delivered in an order that is different from which they were sent. In a FIFO queue, a message is delivered exactly once, and remains available until the consumer processes it and deletes it. The first in first out order is strictly preserved. Amazon Simple Notification Service or SNS is a fully managed pub/sub messaging service for both application to application and application to person communication. Pub/sub means publishing and subscription. A pub/sub model allows you to publish messages, and set up various subscription endpoints to receive messages. Publishers send messages to an SNS topic, and SNS delivers messages to subscribers directly. For instance, you can set up an AWS billing alarm with CloudWatch and SNS. CloudWatch is the publisher, which publishes a message to an SNS topic, whenever the AWS usage is over the threshold. SNS then immediately sends an email notification to you. In this case, your email address is the subscriber. SNS supports many-to-many messaging between distributed systems, microservices and event-driven serverless applications. SNS can fan out messages to a large number of subscription endpoints for parallel processing. SNS matches the topic with a list of subscribers, and sends the messages in near real time. SNS supports many subscription endpoints, including SQS, AWS Lambda, HTTP endpoints, mobile push notifications, text messages and emails. Here is how SNS works. Suppose you have order confirmation application running as a publisher at the back end of an online shopping site. You have created an SNS topic and a few subscription endpoints. The publisher sends an order confirmation notification to the topic, whenever the order is validated and processed. A publisher can be an AWS service, such as CloudWatch Events or Lambda. For instance, you can create a Lambda trigger to process a stream from the order table of DynamoDB, and publish a message to an SNS topic, whenever a new order is added to the order table. You can have many subscription endpoints including SQS, AWS Lambda, HTTP endpoints, mobile push notifications, text messages and emails. SNS can fan out messages to these endpoints for parallel processing. For instance, when an order confirmation notification is published to the topic, SNS can fan out the message to a Lambda function for some post-order processing, push a message to an SQS queue for order fulfillment, and send a reminding email to your staff for some manual processing. Amazon Simple Email Service or SES is a cloud-based email service that enables developers to send emails from within any application at scale. You might have used email services like MailChimp or SendGrid. SES is a similar cloud-based email service that is seamlessly integrated with many AWS services. SES supports a variety of use cases, such as marketing and transactional emails. You can use SES to send emails with custom templates including custom header and HTML body. SES can also receive emails on your behalf and perform certain actions, such as scanning for spam and viruses. SES can help monitor the detail of your email sending status, such as how many emails were delivered or bounced, how many were marked as spam, how many recipients opened the email and clicked links in the email. You can use the SMTP interface or AWS SDKs to integrate SES with your existing application to send transactional emails. For instance, you can use SES to send a welcome email to users after new sign-up on your website. In this episode, we've learned different AWS messaging services, SQS, SNS, and SES. SQS is a push-pull messaging queue service. You have producers send messages to the queue and consumers constantly check for new messages and process them with a small delay. There are two types of SQS queues, standard queues and FIFO queues. A standard queue delivers messages at least once out of order. A FIFO queue delivers messages exactly once, always in the first in first out order. SNS is a pub/sub messaging service. You have publishers send notifications to a topic, and SNS delivers messages in near real time. SNS can fan out messages to many subscription endpoints for parallel processing, including SQS, AWS Lambda, HTTP endpoints, mobile push notifications, text messages and emails. SES is a cloud-based email service that enables you to send or receive custom emails from within an application, such as marketing and transactional emails. Okay, that's all for AWS messaging services. Thanks for watching and see you in the next episode.
Hope you've enjoyed watching this episode. If you liked the video, please help us and hit the like button. If you want to watch more tutorials, please subscribe to the Cloudemy TV channel. Make sure to turn on the notification and stay tuned. At Cloudemy, we're passionate about cloud and AI technology. Please share your feedback and thoughts in the comments below. Feel free to let us know what topics you'd like to watch. Happy watching and happy learning.